Hi, good morning. You're very, very welcome. My name is Manus Trini here. I'm here in the Brexit unit in Enterprise Ireland. You're very welcome. It's hard to believe this is actually our 7th webinar at this stage. Time really does fly. So today we're looking at the whole area of customs again. So you might recall we did a webinar with one of Brida's colleagues there recently, Celine, on the whole basics, the essentials of customs. That's all around the customs processes, customs documentation, ERI numbers, etc. So actually, this is where I put my headmaster's hat on. So if you haven't seen that webinar, go back, do your homework, and go and have a look at it, because it's a really good one. It's really insightful, pretty short, and it's a great sort of foundation for what we're going to cover today. So today we're going to cover the topic of inward processing, and I must admit it's one of those questions we get a huge amount in the Brexit unit in probably in the last 9 to 12 months. And I thought it really, because of the volume of queries, we thought we'd have a bit of a deeper dive into it. So that's kind of the topic we're going to look at today. And inward processing, just very briefly, and we have experts here, Brida here, will walk us through it in more detail, is that process available from revenue that will help you suspend some of the duty and VAT on goods that you import from the UK, you process in Ireland, and then send back, re-export again. So take, for example, you're importing your flour, your sugar to make your bread or your cakes, aluminium or steel that then turns into agricultural machinery. So something like inward processing can help you reduce some of the burden around that processes and make that process more efficient. So what are we going to look at today? We're going to look at a bit of a deeper dive into inward processing, what it means, what the benefits of it is, of course, and how you apply for it. And a bit like anything, like ISO or any other authorization or program, once you get it, you need to be able to maintain it and keep it. So we'll talk about what you need to do as a business to be able to maintain that inward processing approval once you get it. So before we start, maybe we'll have a look at some of the housekeeping. So we'll plan to go for maybe about 20-25 minutes on slides. We'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A, and we'll have it wrapped up in about 45 minutes or so. So if you have any questions, there's a button on your control panel that allows you to submit some questions, and we'll try to get to some of them towards the end. Lastly, I should say that this has been recorded, so you'll get an email anyway if you're watching some of this or need to drop off within 24 hours, which give you access to the full recording, so you can watch that to your heart's content over and over again as you like over Christmas. So just a quick introduction now to our speaker, our expert today, Brida. Brida, you're very welcome. Thanks for making the trip up from Nina for us.
No problem. Thanks, Manus. Thanks for inviting us.
So Brida, she's the Assistant Principal Officer in the Customs and Authorizations Unit in Nina. She's worked in that role for the last 3 years. And one of her key roles, her key task is to ensure that the legislation from Brussels is correctly implemented in Ireland, and also to help traders as part of that journey through the various authorizations and release, and help them get their application and work with companies to help them process and get their various approvals. So we're delighted to have Brida with us today as our guest speaker to go through some of this topic in more detail. But Brida, before we might jump into it, I'm just going back. I want to go back into your title. So you're in the Customs Authorizations and Release Unit. That's a lot of words that are not probably used to many people. Can you just give us a flavour of what that actually means, and what the role of the unit there is in Nina?
No problem, Manus. I suppose there's two sides to it, really. The authorizations is where there's an actual application, authorization, a customs decision. And really what we're talking about there from our unit is the customs special procedures, and inward processing that we're talking about today. It'd be one of those special procedures. I'd be going into more detail on inward processing. We would also deal with the customs warehouse procedure, and what that is you can import non-union goods with the duty and VAT suspended for storage, and there's actually no limited time on the storage. The duty then is paid when the goods are released to free circulation, or if they're re-exported, there's no duty due. Another special procedure you probably heard about, it's often associated with the inward processing, even though the rules are quite different, is outward processing. And what that is really is it's union goods that are sent outside of the EU for processing, and then they're re-imported into the EU, and the duty and VAT is based purely on the processing costs that took place outside the EU. Our next special procedure, which would be an authorization as well, is temporary admission. And that allows certain non-union goods to be imported temporarily for a particular purpose into the union, again, with your duty and VAT suspended. And I suppose there's certain rules associated that the goods have to be re-exported unaltered and within a certain period of time. And then finally, there is the end use authorization, and that's actually it's a tariff, favorable tariff treatment. So certain goods that have end use on them, they can be imported with reduced or zero tariff. They're free circulation, but they have to be put to that specific end use. So really, I suppose when we're talking about authorizations, from our point of view, they're the 5 areas: inward processing, outward processing, customs warehousing, temporary admission, and end use. And that all involves an application, authorization, and certain criteria and obligations to be adhered to. The other side of our unit is reliefs, and really, without going into too much detail, I suppose really that's kind of relief at import. It might be different, I suppose, different scenarios, like maybe a transfer of residence or return goods. If goods were, EU goods were exported out of the EU and were imported back in within a certain period unaltered, there's a relief. And really that's, I suppose, you claim that based on your import declaration, certain codes and backup documentation. So it's a separate side to the authorizations. So I hope that's an indication, I suppose, of the authorizations and the relief side of our unit.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty busy unit there, Breda. So I suppose really it seems to be so much that's available from revenue that I suppose once you get your basics in place, whether it's your ERI numbers and your commodity codes, you identified who's going to process those documentation for you, whether it's yourself or whether it's a logistics firm or a customs agent. Once you get beyond that stage, then you can have a deeper look into some of these authorizations that are available from revenue. So today we're going to have a look particularly at the area of inward processing. So Breda, I have a poll here. I'm going to try and get some feedback from some of our attendees. Just bear with me a second until I run this, and then we can have a maybe talk through it.
Yeah.
So we have a question here. I hope that should appear now on your screen. So in terms of, in relation to inward processing journey, what stage are you currently at? So we have 4 options here, so maybe you can vote on those. So the first one is still understanding what this is all about, validating what it means for my business, and just kind of building your business case to see if this makes sense for me or if not. You're preparing your documentation to apply for revenue. And finally, you've submitted your application to revenue. So I'm seeing some of the polls coming through. So Breda, while that's coming through and collecting some of that data, have you seen much applications coming through the NINA department? Has it been a busy period for inward processing?
Yeah, definitely, Manus. I suppose just to get an idea, currently we've 172 companies that are authorised for inward processing in Ireland, and we have about 55 inward processing applications on hand at the moment. And out of that 55, 45 of those are actually Brexit related.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
yeah, there is a huge interest in an inward processing, and some of them are ready to go. Some of them are, at different stages of the application process, but we've seen a definite interest and a lot of queries as well, maybe that just haven't got as far as the stage of application just yet.
And Breda, would they be typically big companies? Is inward processing something that's really for the multinational, or have you seen this right down to some of the SME micro business? Do you need to be of a certain size to make this work?
No, definitely not. Out of that 172, we've a huge variety in the size of companies, and even the ones that are on hand. There's a lot of SMEs involved there. I mean, really, the support is there from our unit. And once, I suppose, you know the criteria, you know what your applications are. An SME, smaller company, can definitely avail of the inward processing authorization if it would benefit them.
Okay, very good. I'm just looking here at some of the results. So we have, I'm not sure, Breda, you can see that as well. So we have about 50% of the attendees still trying to understand what this is about. We have 20% validating what this means for their business, so they're a little bit more further progressed. We have 20% preparing documentation to apply for revenue, and a few actually have submitted their application already. So there's still a number of companies there, naturally enough, trying to understand what's the next step as part of your own Brexit planning, what other things are available. So there's a bit of a pipeline developing for you there, Breda, in the unit. So you might need to have to cancel some of those holidays later on. But listen, that's something for another day. So Breda, I'm going to step out now. I'm going to close this, and it'll bring you back to your slides, and I'll catch up with you at the end.
Okay, thanks, Manus. So I suppose if I just start, I'm trying to give an overview of inward processing today, and really I suppose there'll be probably a lot of very specific questions on inward processing, and I would advise you to make contact with the unit. I've provided contact details at the end of the slideshow if there's particular things that you want to work out, and maybe even before making an application to contact us, because we can guide you through the actual application process. So if I just start, what does inward processing mean? So IP, inward processing, it allows for non-union goods, which we call raw material, or sometimes I suppose it can get confusing. It can be called the Annex 1 material, to be brought into the EU for processing with the duty and VAT suspended. So normally, I suppose if you're importing third country goods, it would mean that at the point of import, your duty and VAT would be payable. But this authorization means that it's suspended. It means that you're actually, the goods are under customs control, they're being declared into a procedure, and I'll give you more detail on that as we go on. The processing operation, it can be anything like from simple repackaging to a very complicated manufacturing process. And as I mentioned there to Manus a minute ago, we've very, very varied inward processing authorizations. So if you think it is something that could benefit your company, it'd be worthwhile just making contact and talking to us on it. The processed product then are sometimes referred to as the finished product or the Annex 2 product. That can either be re-exported back outside the EU, or it can be released to free circulation within the EU market. So there's a few options. That would actually be discharging the procedure. So your declaration with the goods being declared into IP is putting your goods under the IP procedure, and then either re-exporting, releasing to free circulation, or there is an option like you could put it into another customs procedure. You could decide, I'm going to put these goods into my customs warehouse. That would all discharge the IP procedure, but I'll give you more detail as we go along through the slideshow. So how could it benefit a trader? Well, as I said, the duty and VAT is suspended, and like in some cases, you won't actually end up paying duty and VAT at all if you're re-exporting. So that would be a definite benefit for the trader. Then there's a possible lower or nil rate of duty if the processed goods are discharged from IP by release to free circulation. So I suppose if I just take an example there, like if you were importing your raw material, just say you were making stents, a medical product, and you're importing some plastic tubing or maybe some wire, and the duty rate could be 6% on that raw material. When you go through the processing procedure, you don't pay the duty on that raw material when it comes in. And then when you're releasing your finished product to free circulation, the duty rate is based on the finished product. And say like in the cases of a stent, it would be 0%. So it would mean then that you're not paying duty. You're importing these goods, not paying the duty on the raw material, you're releasing to free circulation, and you don't have duty to pay, or it could be a reduced duty rate. So, and the final point there is, I suppose, if the goods are re-exported outside the EU, your duty and VAT liability is gone as well. So it could definitely be a good benefit to a trader in those cases. It's very important, I suppose, if I just mention I know Celine would have talked about commodity codes. I suppose for customs purposes, every product has its own commodity code, and that's what actually generates the amount of duty that would be due on the product. And that is actually, it has to be quoted on the customs declaration. So it's very important that the correct commodity codes are determined by the company. And again, you can look at the TARIC system. It's an EU system that lists all those codes. It's a 10-digit code, but if you need assistance, there's a classification unit in our NINA offices as well, and they can help you out, because sometimes it can be tricky trying to classify your product. So if you're releasing your finished product to free circulation, so you're releasing it to the EU market, it's the Union Customs Code is the EU legislation that all of these procedures operate under. I've actually given the legislative references at the end of the slideshow, but there's actually two ways you can release to free circulation under Union Customs Code. You could have your duty and VAT calculated on the processed finished product. So as I mentioned, I suppose if your finished product has 0% duty, or if it's a reduced rate, that could benefit you. Or that's the default position. You can actually apply to have your duty and VAT calculated on the originally imported raw material when you're releasing the processed product to free circulation. So you're not paying on your raw material when you initially import, but you can pay your VAT and duty on that when you're releasing the finished product to free circulation. So they're the two options. As I said, I suppose option one, the duty and VAT calculated on the finished product, is the default. And if I just mention here sensitive goods, I'll be going into more detail on the sensitive goods later. Really, the sensitive goods are listed within the UCC. It's the DA, it's the Delegated Act, Annex 7102, and really it's a lot of the agricultural goods. You're talking your meats, dairy, cereals, flour, sugar. They're actually treated differently for IP, and I'll just mention that later on in the slides. So if we look at how traders can get authorized for inward processing, there's a few criteria that you have to fulfill. I'll just briefly go through them here. Your company must be established in the EU, so you must have permanent business establishment within the EU, and your main accounts for customs purposes must be within the EU. There should be no infringements of tax or customs legislation, so you're a compliant trader. A regular user of the procedure. So really, I suppose if you're applying for a full authorization, I suppose you need to show that there is a need that you will be importing goods. It's a business model. It's not something that you're doing as a once-off. Because if you were just doing it as a once-off, I suppose there's a separate simplified way you can do that. For a full authorization, you need to be doing this regularly. So you're a regular user of the procedure. You must meet the economic conditions outlined in EU legislation. So for goods that aren't of a sensitive nature, I suppose the economic conditions can be anything from processing, repairing, attaching goods to other goods, assembling. There's many areas you can cover within those economic conditions. They're again listed within the Delegated Act. I think it's Article 167 of the Delegated Act outlines the economic conditions. Appropriate record keeping, then I suppose this is one of the obligations under the authorization. So really, customs need to be able to track the goods from when they're declared into inward processing, which is when your customs declaration is accepted, right through the processing to when they're discharged. So they would be discharged either when they're released to free circulation or re-exported or perhaps put into another customs procedure. So there has to be a flow that we can track the goods right through. There's an actual document, the format is within the legislation as well, that has to be submitted to revenue at certain intervals. It's called a bill of discharge, and I'll be talking more about that later as well. A comprehensive guarantee authorization is required. Now, this is a very important part, I suppose, of the IP. What some traders might not realize is there's two authorizations involved. You have to apply and be authorized for your inward processing and also for your comprehensive guarantee. That's an application and an authorization process. Now, what it is, I suppose it's a financial guarantee, and the reason I suppose it's legislated within the Union Customs Code is there's duty that has been suspended, and so it's just to cover the risk in case that duty isn't collected. So that's the comprehensive guarantee, and we would be advising any companies, if you're applying for your inward processing, you need to apply for your comprehensive guarantee at the same time. Now, the criteria, I suppose I've mentioned there, covers the comprehensive guarantee. The main criteria is you have to be established in the EU, no infringements of tax customs legislation, and a regular user of the procedure. So it makes sense to, you can't get an inward processing authorization without having your comprehensive guarantee authorization in place. And finally there, I suppose the application is made on the EU Customs Decision Management System. That system went live in October 2017. So any of our customs decisions, the applications and the authorizations all issue through that system. So we would advise traders to make both applications at one time on that system, and getting the support in the offices in NINA, we can guide you through how to make that application. It's probably best to talk to somebody within the unit before actually making the application. So what information will the trader require to apply for the inward processing authorization? You'll need your EORI number and your auth certificate. I suppose I know Celine would went into the details of those particular numbers in the earlier webinar, and probably a lot of you have those at the moment. But in order to even get access to the customs decision system, you will need your EORI number and your auth certificate. The CN code of the raw material and the processed product. So you're going to be importing goods to put under the processing. That's your raw material. And as I mentioned earlier, I suppose every product has a CN code, a commodity code. And it's very important. I suppose one of the first things your company would need to look at is, what are the CN codes of the goods I'm importing? What's the duty rate? And then what are the CN codes of my processed product when I'm releasing to free circulation? And is there a benefit? Or I suppose if you're importing the raw material to process and you're re-exporting and there's duty on the raw material, there's a definite benefit then with the inward processing procedure. But I think it's very important that companies are happy that they have the correct CN code. And as I said, there's more information on the revenue website, the tariff system, and also our classifications unit in the NINA offices would help you out there. So that's what within the authorization. You would be applying, our authorizations are a 3-year period. So when you're making your application for inward processing, you're going to list the goods you're importing to process, but you're also going to indicate the quantity and value over a 3-year period for each CN code that you think you will require. So it's important, like within the authorization, you'll be working within those approved limits. So to have your correct CN code and to look at the quantity and value you think you require over a 3-year period of the authorization. The next thing you'll need to know is your period of discharge. And really what the period of discharge is, once the goods are declared to inward processing, the length of time until they are discharged. So really I suppose the normal period of discharge is around 6 months. In certain cases, if a company makes an exceptional case, that can be longer. But one thing I suppose to be aware of is if a company's importing, if you're importing the goods in bulk, but they're not going into the processing procedure for a while, you may need a customs warehouse authorization. The inward processing can't be used purely for the storage of goods. Now it's fine if you're bringing in the goods and it's a couple of weeks and then the processing starts, but you can't bring in the goods just storing them and not putting them under the processing for a few months. So the period of discharge would be monitored under the authorization as well. Another thing you'll need to know is your rate of yield, and really what we're talking about there is how much of the imported product is in the finished product. And again, maybe I suppose if I just give an example, if planks of wood are imported in lengths of 10 meters and a trader needs only 9 meters to make, say, a piece of furniture, the rate of yield there is 90%, and the 10% then is shown as waste. So we just need to be able to identify the goods and what way they're being used. The rate of yield can be ratio, or it can be a percentage calculation. Another example I had is if wheat was being imported to make flour, And the rate of yield again is determined by how much is needed to make X amount of flour, how much wheat is needed to make X amount of flour. So if you had, say, 100 kilos of wheat was needed to make 50 kilos of flour, the rate of yield there could be ratio, could be 2 to 1. So again, it's something, I suppose, within the application stage, the company will indicate what they think the rate of yield is for, you know, each of the products. And like when an application is made, a local revenue officer will be going out and visiting the company and talking through all of these items with the company, and they can discuss the period of discharge, rate of yield during that evaluation process. Another, I suppose, for the application, you need a description of the process in operation. So really, it's a general text description of what the company are doing, what manufacturing or processing will be taking place. And finally, as I stressed earlier, the comprehensive guarantee application, it's absolutely essential that that comes in at the same time as the inward processing application. And I'll give more details on the comprehensive guarantee authorization shortly. Actually now. What is the comprehensive guarantee? So it's a financial guarantee, as I mentioned earlier, and it covers the duty suspended under IP. It's another application, another authorization under the customs decision system. As I said, you make the application for both at the one time. They're examined simultaneously, and the IP authorization can't issue without the CG authorization in place. So the comprehensive guarantee, it can be provided by a form of undertaking backed by financial institution or in the form of a cash deposit. So the majority, I suppose, of our applications so far are form of undertaking backed by financial institution, and the financial institution has to be accredited by the central bank. The cash deposit is actually where it's actually lodged with revenue, so you don't need your actual form of undertaking stamped and signed off by your bank in that case. We would advise, I suppose, if when you're making your application for IP and comprehensive guarantee, it's a good idea to make contact with your financial institution at that time, because it can just take a little bit of time for the various checks and that the financial institution has to carry out. So to get in touch with your financial institution at that time and try and start working through things. The amount then, I suppose, for each of our different special procedures, the EU has set a calculation of how the reference amount for the guarantee should be calculated. So for inward processing, it's basically the amount calculated based on the highest stock records on hand during the previous 12 months. So you'd look back over the 12 months and you look at the month where you had the highest amount of goods under your inward processing procedure, and it's calculated based on the highest duty, each CN code, the highest duty amount, and that would be your comprehensive guarantee that you would either have your cash deposit or your form of undertaking for. Now, if there isn't, I suppose, if you don't have historic records, if you're starting out, it's a projection that's reviewed then probably after 6 months or that, and it can be, I suppose, either increased or decreased depending on how the projection went. Maybe at this stage I could just mention that the comprehensive guarantee, the SBCI, Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland, they recently they announced that the SME credit guarantee scheme can actually be extended to cover the comprehensive guarantee for these procedures. So that's very positive. I suppose it's operated on behalf of DBEI and the three banks, I suppose, that are actually operating as our Bank of Ireland, Allied Irish Bank and Ulster Bank. And this actual credit guarantee scheme could help traders, I suppose, if there is an issue with access to credit or other issues. The reductions and waivers, now again, it's subject to meeting certain criteria. I won't go into all that detail today, but you can actually apply for reduction to 50% to 30% or a full waiver on the amount of your comprehensive guarantee. And again, there's full details on the criteria you have to meet on the revenue website. And if your company is an AEO, an authorized economic trader, then it means that you actually automatically have a waiver on your guarantee. The comprehensive guarantee as well can cover more than one procedure. So if you had a customs warehouse procedure and an inward processing procedure, you can have the one comprehensive guarantee, one application and authorization. The reference amount for each of the procedures would just be broken down within the authorization. Sorry, I think I just skipped one there. Customs declarations requirements. Really, I suppose this is just to stress that even if you have an inward process and authorization, you are still required to lodge customs declarations. So all of the customs formalities still apply. So what you'd need to do is you'd need to know how to declare properly into the inward processing procedure. So when you are issued with your inward processing authorization, you will have a unique number, and it would mean anytime you're declaring your goods into IP, that authorization number has to be declared on the customs declaration. You also need to ensure that you have the correct procedure code. There's a procedure code for each of our special procedures, the ones I mentioned earlier as well. So the procedure code for inward processing is 51. So you have to ensure that you have the correct procedure code, your authorization number, and only the CN codes that have been authorized on your authorization can be declared on the import declaration. And what that will mean then is that duty and VAT won't be collected once you make your declaration properly to the correct procedure using your authorization number. And just be aware that you still need to make your customs declarations, and the goods are still subject to the normal customs formalities, interventions. If there's license requirements, they will all still apply. So the next section here is on the record keeping. I mentioned the bill of discharge earlier. So at the application stage, and when the local revenue officer goes out and visits the company at the initial stage just to evaluate the application, there's agreement on the bill of discharge and how often it should be submitted. Normally they can be quarterly, they can be monthly, quarterly, or sometimes it could be biannual, and it really varies, just I suppose depending on the complexity of the actual manufacturing process. I suppose the authorization holder, how familiar they are with customs procedures, the volume of declarations. So that is agreed at that time. It's a predefined report, like we have set information that we need to gather from the company to monitor the authorization, and it needs to contain all this information so that customs can actually see the movement of the goods once they're declared into IP throughout till they're discharged. It also keeps track of the overall quantities and values. I mentioned earlier each of the imported products into IP, or any products being imported from outside the EU, they all have a CN code. And within the authorization, each CN code will have quantities and values, proved quantities and values over the period of the authorization, which is normally the 3 years. So the bill of discharge will show how much of each CN code has been used, how much is remaining, and ensuring that the authorization holder is staying within the authorized amounts. Now, if a certain product, that you're nearly reaching the limit of what you've been authorized for the 3-year period, if it's running low, you can apply for an increase. But the very important thing is to make sure you apply, give yourself time to apply for the increase and have it authorized, because again, it's an amendment to the authorization and it has to be done through the customs decision system. So to give yourself enough time to apply and not let your quantities or values go above the authorization and your declaration be rejected. So it's very important to keep an eye on your actual authorized amounts. This is just really to give you an idea, I suppose, of the kind of information contained within the bill of discharge. We have a template that we can forward to anybody who's interested, just to get an idea of what kind of information your systems would have to gather. So first of all, I suppose it's the particulars of the customs declarations placing the goods under IP. So once you declare your goods under inward processing, each customs declaration has what's called an MRN, movement reference number, and it's unique to that declaration. So you would quote your MRN, the date of the customs declaration. You'd identify the goods like the CN codes, quantities and values that have been declared to IP. The rate of yield would also be included, because we have to take account of if there's any waste or that of the raw material. And I suppose overall then, you can see the period of discharge. You can see when goods were first declared to the procedure, and then have they been discharged, say within the 6 months, have they been re-exported, released to free circulation, or maybe to another customs procedure. And I suppose if they haven't been discharged properly within the period of discharge, there could be a debt arising. The duty would have to be collected that was suspended. So really, the bill of discharge it's a document. It's laid down in the EU legislation that it has to be submitted by any authorization holder at certain intervals, and it will show the flow of the goods the whole way from when they're declared into the procedure until they're finally discharged. I mentioned the sensitive goods earlier, and I won't go into too much detail here, because I think if there's any traders that are interested in IP authorization for sensitive goods, really need to maybe contact the NINA office first and talk it through with us, and we can guide you on it. But if you want to just have a look, as I mentioned, there's a list of the sensitive goods. They're contained in the delegated acts, the Annex 7102, and really it's all those agriculture. It's the Regulation 1308 of 2013. So there is additional rules. There are additional rules for IP for sensitive goods. The economic conditions, there's 4 set economic conditions, and you need to qualify under one of those. And I suppose they're stricter than the non-sensitive goods. You can have a look at those. The duration of the authorization, the Irish administration, we can only issue authorizations for 3 years. For the non-sensitive, we can go to 5 years. We often go at 3, but for the sensitive, 3 years is the maximum. And then also, I suppose, release to free circulation. If you're importing sensitive goods and you're putting them under IP, when you're releasing to free circulation, you don't actually have the option to release based on the duty and VAT being calculated on the finished product. You can only release to free circulation based on the raw material. But that's the only authorization the Irish administration can issue. If you wanted to import sensitive goods under IP and release them to free circulation based on the finished product, you have to make a case to the EU, to the Commission. It has to be examined and voted on by all member states. So it's a more complicated process. I suppose if you're importing the sensitive goods and processing and re-exporting, it's a much easier process, but it can take up to a year if you're sending an application to be examined by the Commission. And I suppose the onus is on the company to prove that that union goods can't be used, really. So I'd advise, I suppose, if you are thinking about an IP authorization for sensitive goods, to make contact with Authorization Reliefs Unit in NINA. I have contact details at the end of the presentation. I mentioned earlier the EU legislation, so if you want to have some light reading, there's the references, there's the UCC and the delegated and implementing regulations. So all of the criteria and the obligations and the rules are laid out clearly there. Well, clearly might be a bit positive. So if I just recap the key considerations, the first thing you need to look at is, will your company benefit from an IP authorization? So I'd advise companies, check your CN code, your commodity codes of your raw materials, see the duty rate that applies, and then if you're releasing to free circulation, look at the duty rate on your finished product that you're releasing to free circulation. If you're re-exporting, it means that the duty and VAT, you're relieved from any obligations there. But just to be sure you have your correct CN code is a very good starting point. Then if you just look to see, do you meet the different criteria and obligations? So what we're talking about there, established in the EU, we're talking about no infringements of customs or tax legislation, regular user procedure, that you'll be able to meet the obligations and conditions, the bill of discharge, the record record keeping. So just that you, and I mean, once you've set up to maybe extract the information from your systems for the bill of discharge, you know, it once you've initially set it up, it can be, you know, the process is much easier than after that you're doing it on your monthly basis or quarterly basis. I mentioned the CN codes again, the raw materials and processed products. You need to just kind of have a look and see what you consider is your period of discharge, your rate of yield, are your goods sensitive goods. So have a look at the DA, the Annex 7102, and you've other, I suppose, if they are sensitive goods, you need to look at the particular economic conditions there at the DA Article 1671F. So to have a look at that. Just to know, customs declarations and formalities are still required. An authorization like this doesn't do away with any of those requirements. And to make contact with us, like we will provide the support and guide you through, and just talk through whether you think IP would be something that could benefit your company. So there are the contact details, I suppose, a generic email address, and then there's contact details for some of the people in our unit that can help you out with any of your queries. And I've also my own email address there as well. So I hope it gives you, I suppose, some sort of idea. It's very much an overview of inward processing. We definitely, I suppose, need to talk to companies separately on specific queries, but it would just give you an idea, and maybe you can maybe take a look and see, would it benefit your company, or is it something you would consider? So I'll go back to Manus now at this stage.
Great, Breda. Thanks very much.
Okay.
That was really interesting. There's a lot there. I can see it's quite an in-depth subject. So we have a few questions come in, so let's try and take some questions. One of them that come in, which I can imagine you get quite often asked, is around the process. So how long does it take? How much does it cost? So if I decide today that, you know, I think IP is something that would make sense for my business because of a certain value of a commodity code and tariff, and I call up revenue, what happens after that? What can you walk us through the timelines and interaction with revenue and the various audits that might happen along the way?
Okay. Well, I suppose initially the first step is, I suppose, if you make contact with us over the phone or by email, we can advise you on your IP application. Then you're going to the customs decision system. It's an EU system. You can go onto the revenue website, and there's a link there, or we have an inward processing manual on the revenue website. There's a link there. So you go onto your CDS and you make your application. Now you're making your two applications, your inward processing and your comprehensive guarantee. Now sometimes, I suppose, maybe it can be a bit tricky. The inward processing application can be a bit tricky on the customs decision system. So we can, you know, if you give a ring, somebody will guide you through how to make that application. So once, I suppose, you've a full application submitted with all the information that's required, your application is accepted. So what that means then is there'll be a local revenue officer. We will from the NINA office, we will give all the information to the revenue officer, who will be, I suppose, you know, we over your authorization, and they will make arrangements then to visit your company. And I suppose when they make that initial contact and visit, they'll be looking at things such as you know, they'll call to your premises, the processing operation to be carried out. They'll look at the premises where the processing is being carried out. They'll look at your accounting procedure, you know, how you're going to get your bill of discharge together. Can you meet the obligations like that have to be fulfilled? Just they'll talk you through, I suppose, the importance of staying within your limits for your, you know, your commodity codes, the raw materials you're importing. They'll look at your time limit for discharging, how you're going to discharge, whether you're re-exporting, whether you're releasing to free circulation. They'll talk you through all of that, and as well the reference amount for the guarantee, just to see that they're in agreement with the way you have calculated the reference amount. So I suppose that's the initial contact, and then, you know, there's an evaluation report done up after that visit, and after the revenue officer has gone through all those details with the company. So if I suppose then if you take it you're authorized, the interaction afterwards, then the bill of discharge is like one of the main ways that we monitor we monitor the authorization, and it's an obligation under the authorization that it is submitted at the agreed intervals. Otherwise, I suppose there would be compliance checks carried out maybe every 6 months. That doesn't mean a visit to the company. That can be a desk-based compliance checks. And also I suppose maybe generally once within the lifetime of the authorization, there could be an audit. So I suppose they're the interaction. Talking about timelines, what we would advise, and I mentioned this during the slideshow, is if you're making an application for your inward processing and your comprehensive guarantee, contact your financial institution at that stage, because sometimes we're ready to go with the inward processing authorization, but we're waiting on that undertaking from the financial institution. So make that contact straight away. You're probably, I mean, you're talking probably 6 to 8 weeks from application right through to authorization. So
Okay,
you need
that's not a huge amount of time. That's not
yeah.
excessive.
Yeah, and that's, I suppose, everything running smoothly. There will be cases where, I suppose when on the initial visit to premises, more information is needed, and there's different scenarios. But we do find, and I would stress that, to try and just get your undertaking organised, that that can speed up the process. But yeah, that is the average length of time we're talking about for the application authorization
It comes
process.
across as quite a supportive. So you have the direct people's names, and they can help you. There's a template around the discharge that can give you some ideas of what that would look like, and there's the revenue team that can guide you as well. So it seems quite a real sort of there to support you as you apply through the authorization.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have the generic email address if you want to just send us in, your business model, and, just outline what you're doing, and, will IP help and that. And then definitely the phone numbers are there if you want to talk to somebody. And as I said, if you want somebody, I mean, you can choose to get a customs agent to make the application through the customs decision system, or you may choose to do it yourself. And there are people there that can guide you through that system.
And the customs is pretty, just again, the customs decision station, that's the system accessible via Ross, is that right?
It's actually not via Ross. Like, there's actually a link to it on the Commission site and on the Revenue site. It's an EU system, but there's a link there on the Revenue website, or within the, if you go into the Revenue website and the Customs and Traders page, the Economic Procedures Processing, there's a link in there as well. And it's actually linked from the Comprehensive Guarantee section as well. Anywhere where you need to access that system, there's a link there.
Okay, we might do, Breda, is we might add it to the end of this as well. We can share it with people just so
Yeah,
they have the link.
sure.
So there's another question here. I have one here from Ronan, and it goes back to the discharge period. So is the period of discharge a fixed date for the totality of each consignment? Can you just talk us through the validity period there for discharge again?
Yeah, well, I suppose that with the inward processing, once the goods are declared into inward processing, so that's when your actual customs declaration has been accepted. That's when the time starts ticking there. So that's the start of your period of discharge. The end of the period of discharge is when they have been re-exported, released to free circulation, or released to another customs procedure. That's the discharge. Now, it can operate first in, first out. So, I mean, if it's the same CN code, you take it that the goods that go in on an earlier date, they're the first ones coming back out of the procedure. So you can operate that way on the inward processing, but the quantities, they have to show them coming back out, if it is 6 months, within the 6 months. So I hope that
Okay,
that answers
okay.
that.
And so just again on the cost issue, there's no cost to apply for this to revenue or to the cost is mostly then associated with the financial cost of the guarantee. Is that right?
Yeah, because we've a huge number of applications that are getting ready for Brexit, and really, it hasn't cost the company anything to get that application in, get the evaluation done, and prepare. Now, when I suppose the costs will start is, I suppose, when you're paying for your financial guarantee. So maybe, I'm not sure. I suppose you could talk to your financial institution whether you can get things ready and have that ready to go, because I suppose the IP authorization can't issue until the comprehensive guarantee authorization is in place. But there's no cost up to that point. So I would advise companies to, to make those preparations that you can, just in case. And then when it comes to if it is required, maybe you'll be able to get your comprehensive guarantee, have it ready, that you'll be able to get it in place very quickly.
Okay, great, Breda. Listen, I think that might wrap up the questions. I know there's one or two we haven't got to yet, but what we'll do is we promise we'll get back to you. We'll take note of it and we'll reply to you directly. What I might do, Breda, is just grab you for a cup of coffee and we go through the list and see what we can do with today. Maybe we might get back to people today or certainly over the next couple of days. So one last slide, Breda, if you wouldn't mind going on to the next slide for me, please.
Yep.
And that's just really more of a wrap up. And this is, again, we've gone through this as well in previous webinars, but there's a range of state supports available to help you prepare for Brexit and what this future will look like for us. So today we talked about the whole area of customs. So we have in Enterprise Ireland this program called the Brexit Act On Initiative, which will allow you to get some insight and expertise into the various customs procedures and the customs terminology and documentation, including what we talked today around inward processing. Also just want to mention one or two other ones as well. In particular, we have our Be Prepared grant. So if you did decide you needed some external support to go on the next stage after the Act On assignment, then we can support the cost of 50% to help you, for example, apply for inward processing if you wanted to get some third-party assistance. I also wanted to mention as well there's a range of supports available from other agencies. Intertrade Ireland, local enterprise office also have supports available to help you along this own customs journey. Intertrade Ireland have their Brexit voucher program, which again will help you cover help you understand what the issues are around customs, and also support some of the costs that might happen if you wanted to get some external support to apply again for something like inward processing. So the overall message is that there's a range of supports, no matter if you're an EI client or not, if you're an SME, a micro enterprise. Have a look at our website, prepareforbrexit.ie, to get an understanding of what's available from the state, and I encourage you just to reach out and use what's available to you. Any other questions that you have or topics that we haven't covered today, I'd suggest just drop us an email and we'll get back to them. This topic isn't going to go away anytime soon, so we'll be spending a bit more time looking at the whole area of customs. Well, the last thing for me to do today really is just to thank Breda. Like I must say, and I should at the start, Breda, we have a number of our clients have gone through inward processing now, and I must admit the feedback that they've all said to us about the NINA team and supporting them and getting back to them and following up with calls has been exceptional. So a big congrats to you and the team in NINA that are helping all the SMEs go through this customs journey with us all together. So that's really valuable. So just thanks again for coming today, and then thanks again for all the work you've been doing over the last while to help business prepare. So I think that's it. We'll wrap up now. So thanks everybody for attending. If I didn't get back to your questions, we'll get back to you. So Breda, you mentioned that light reading. Let's go have a download those documents of Annex 3106, I think it was, and we'll get maybe a strong cup of coffee, and we'll have a look through some of those, and we'll have a look through some of the questions, and we'll get back to people in due course. But thanks again for joining. I hope you found it useful, and make sure to check on the website for other upcoming webinars. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.